Hello, welcome to SHOWstudio's live panel discussions. It's Men's Fashion Month, and like always, we're starting with Pitti Uomo in Florence. Every season, the biannual trade fair invites designers from around the world to showcase their designs outside of the kind of classic traditional menswear that Florentine fashion is really known for. Yohji Yamamoto, Raf Simons, and even Martin Margiela have been the guest designers of Pitti Uomo. And this year it's MM6 and 2023 LVMH winner Setchu. Today we'll be discussing MM6, but before we get into the collection, I want today's panelists to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, I'm Amelie. I'm a fashion podcaster, host of the Fashion Archives podcast, and a content creator.
Hey, I'm Isaac. I'm a celebrity hairstylist. I work in fashion and music, and yeah.
Hi, my name is Harry Tibble, and I'm a director of La Nausée Fashion Archive and Shop.
Hi, my name is Alex. I am a fashion specialist and auctioneer working at Kerry Taylor Auctions.
Hi, I'm Betsy Johnson. I'm a creative director, stylist, and brand developer.
And our sixth panelist today.
This is Dahlia. She is a dash hound from Russia, and she's joining us today.
Amazing.
My daughter.
Welcome to SHOWstudio, guys. So MM6 is a diffusion line of Maison Margiela. It was established in 1997 as Line 6 and was initially a women's label offering conceptual basics, so a more accessible, both commercially and aesthetically, line to the main line. It rebranded to MM6 in 2013 and started to hold runway presentations, and in 2021 became Genderless. Today, it's an anonymous design collective that helms the brand, a nod to Martin's anonymity. I want to start with thoughts on where MM6 exists within the Maison Margiela universe today and the choice of its parent company, Renzo Rosso's OTB group, to give it such a big platform at Pitti Uomo.
I think, with Margiela, it is a very conceptual brand. It always has been. And I think that Margiela, rather than designing for the mass market, has sort of designed for a sort of subset, traditionally, particularly of women. MM6, as you mentioned, gives, makes a similar aesthetic more accessible to sort of a broader range of people, I think. You can't be wearing, well, you could be, but most people choose not to wear sort of runway classics every single day of the week because, a lot of the time that's just not practical. I think that, it makes a lot of sense to have a brand like MM6 and, like the show that took place yesterday where it is a lot of, it still has a similar vibe. It's still edgy. It's still very Margiela. But you could just have, one piece. You could just have a big coat, and that would make sense in someone's wardrobe.
Mm-hmm. I asked a question because with John Galliano's legendary tenure of the brand coming to an end, the last few seasons of MM6, I thought especially, were so referential to Martin's original design aesthetic. And I guess the question is, can those two things exist, or does it work?
I think the mainline Margiela is obviously in its own world entirely, and has been able to develop its own design language whilst also keeping the conceptual side of it. Whereas MM6 is, I feel like, starting to go back to that much more ready-to-wear, wearable, kind of elevated basics, and that allows the MM6 brand to exist in a completely different world and operate as almost like a different company and designer altogether, and allows that the mainline artisanal Galliano Margiela to be completely separate, which I think works really nicely for both brands, and I think it stops them from kind of stepping on each other's toes.
Yeah, and if you look at, I think it was the spring-summer collection, it is very self-referential. You have a skirt made out of a deconstructed pair of men's jeans, which is almost identical to the skirts from Margiela's first ever show. It's very much looking at the history of the brand rather than trying to put its own personality on things, which obviously when you have a guest designer, someone like Galliano coming in, of course he's going to want to adhere to the codes of the house, but you know, it's Galliano.
No, I completely agree. I feel like MM6 is so referential to what Martin was doing, and that's why I actually sometimes prefer MM6 so much to what's going on with the artisanal line. Because I feel like what was going on with Martin Margiela, the artisanal, let's say, portion of the business, was Renzo was really giving Galliano a second chance to really show his flair, and he had so much faith in Galliano when he was kind of left in the dust. I'm pretty sure he was sleeping on a sofa or something when everything kicked off, and I think that he gave him this house to be able to really show his flair, have his Dior moment almost all over again, which I think is amazing. And like you said, it's kind of existing within its own creative universe. However, MM6 is so much more attuned to the stylistic choices, but also the audience and who the customer and the person is that Martin was actually referring to. We're not fully, you know, mysterious, faces covered and whatnot. I feel like we're past that era now, and that would be too referential. But in terms of the silhouettes, the cuts, the fabrics that are used, and the actual, even the price point of everything really makes sense with what he was originally trying to do with his label. Whereas Margiela is really just Galliano's revival, it feels.
Yeah.
Well, I think when he was sort of given the reins of the house, he had a meeting with Martin, and Martin basically said to him, you know, do what you want. Yeah, you know, this is yours now.
Yeah.
Don't hold back, and he hasn't. I mean,
yeah, it's been beautiful, and I think like taking those referential materials of taking everyday objects and really taking what Martin put there and completely taking it almost on this abstract artistic journey and amplifying it to a space that Martin never did is amazing on its own.
Well, it became
on its own
couture.
journey. Exactly, it became a couture line.
And it also, like, I feel like it became like accessible, like almost, and it was like one of those things where I feel like you could play within the realms of them both, and it still be like individual. And I feel like that's what I love more so about MM6 also, because it's like it feels current but also referential, but then at the same time like individual. And I think that I think you said elevated basics, like approach that he's taken or they've taken has been just fab. Boots.
I definitely think it's, sorry.
No, after you.
I definitely think it adds on that commercial viability that a luxury brand today needs, especially when it comes to avant-garde. I'm a huge avant-garde fan, don't get me wrong, but it's very complicated, it's hard to digest, and to be honest, sometimes hard to wear.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that MM6 exists in Margiela's context gives Margiela the chance also to experiment a little bit more with contemporary fashion. Like, look at the collaborations that MM6 has been doing lately.
I just think, like, with the Margiela mainline, it's like, obviously, most people aren't going into the stores and buying these, like, artisanally, like, beautiful pieces. They're making money from the perfumes and the tabbies.
Boots.
So,
Candles.
like,
Those tabbies are
but, like, MM6 is actually selling clothes, and that's really obvious with the clothes that they're making. Like, they're making clothes to be bought in a shop and, like, that fit most, like, body types as well. Like,
it's not with a corset.
Yeah, they're not trying to, like, be inclusive per se, but, like, you can buy a big coat and you can throw it on, whereas, like, you can't wear this, like, giant, like, half mesh, half flower jacket.
I think it's interesting as a culture when you see these two brands that exist under the same umbrella term, or Martin as a concept, not as a person, of this kind of like artistic creative director versus this kind of selfless creative director. I mean, the creative director for MM6 and also Leopold, a friend of mine who does the styling, I feel like they really understand the nuances of what to bring from Margiela, what to bring for the customer, and they're not trying to, you know, throw their flavor at it incessantly versus, you know, the beauty of what Galliano's done and how much of a fantasy that universe is. It kind of brings us to this debate of both should exist and, you know, everything with...
And there's also space, like they both can literally exist.
Yeah.
And I feel like they do it in like the most perfect way, like Boots.
But you can fall in love with a Galliano show, but you know, you can probably are more likely to be able to afford that pair of jeans, you know, and so it gives people the ability to support a brand that they love without having to be sort of a millionaire.
Before we dive into the actual collection that happened last night, it was Autumn/Winter 25 menswear. I do want to ask about the aesthetic choice of Galliano really kind of putting his own flair on it and what we think about that as someone coming into a house and completely...
I wish Galliano got McQueen.
Boots.
This is what I think about regularly. I think it's super interesting what he's done with Margiela, and I think it was due to his relationship with Renzo that was the house that made sense. I think anywhere he went, he would have dug out the references and absolutely tore it apart, and it would have been amazing. However, I always think with every show, like, this is just the essence of McQueen. And I feel like McQueen is turning in his grave and craving for someone like Galliano to come in and actually give it that McQueen flavor again, because really, other than Galliano and McQueen, there was no one else who can really tell a story with a fantasy, and it feels like it has a contemporary right to exist with everything going on planetary-wise. We still completely respect and want to make space for that fantasy, and I feel like it's only really Galliano we're allowing that space for.
But I feel like even like when I like look and you reference like Galliano's like career, like he's the type of person, or they are the type of person that literally has the Midas touch. Like anything they touch, it literally is like purified by greatness. And obviously I feel like that's what I love also about them as like their own entity. And I feel like definitely like, girl, everything you're saying is on point.
But to that point though, I mean, in a way, I think you could argue, I think, you know, for a lot of people, he's the most talented living designer. And there is also an argument that he could be at any house and he would make it spectacular. I think he has done at Margiela, but yeah, I mean...
Exactly, but there needs to be the roots to cling on to. I think what he did with Martin is like go straight in there and pull from those references. You can only really go into Chanel, McQueen, that's probably it, and really find the richness that's already there in the past for you to be able to reinterpret. There's not a lot of houses that have that depth of texture, history, customer, and also contextual relevance throughout decades that you can really reach into. Like McQueen built that over such a short space of time, like what, like 10 years? He built such a richness that if Galliano got his hands on all those old references mixed with what he's got in his mind, like that would be just such a explosion if he's already been able to pull so much.
I think that's why I asked the question, because for the Margiela purist, maybe what John was doing there wasn't true to the brand or true to the initial.
It's definitely a lot more theatrical than Martin's idea.
And I do think Martin's Margiela was,
in some ways,
with performance and theatricality.
But like I also just feel like that's like the point. You know what I mean? It's like the point of having like a creative director is like to literally pull your brand from somewhere else, reinvent it, but also like keep it like true to where it came from.
How much of the fundamentals do you have to keep? Because fundamentally, Martin was based on the not being an individual, this uniformity, this kind of like blending into the silhouette and what this pedestrian nature was, whereas Galliano's fundamental values as a designer is about individualism. So it's like, how much can you change a brand and absorb or keep the fundamentals?
That's why I agree with what you're saying about him going to McQueen would make so much more sense, is because there's a lot more.
Here first, guys.
There's a lot more theatrics and there's a lot more individualism. Like McQueen was at the forefront of his brand. He was the face of his brand. He was an individual. But yeah, Martin.
Although I do think that the theatrical take of Galliano, it's interesting because it's kind of like a continuation of what Margiela was doing. Like the shows were like so unexpected. Like no one never knew what to expect, where the location was, what to expect from the show. There was like
it's more about the individualism that we're touching. I think it's like Martin didn't see himself as an individual. It's always we. Whereas like Galliano it's Galliano's Margiela. Like that's a completely different idea, and it's the fun.
It's not about the stylistic nature. I think like all of the textures, and he's dug a lot out that has been, you know, fundamentally from Martin. It's just that value base of like they're just two very different approaches, and it's very.
I feel like I've been talking about this a lot like recently in terms of just like duality versus like infrastructure and fundamentals, and it's like how far can you push something that has already been pushed beyond its boundaries? And obviously I think that's what's like really interesting about this conversation, because we're kind of all talking about the same thing, but it's like very much perspective. And I guess like Galliano is one like unique designer who I think, or like creative director who has the ability to just like require that space and I guess not really have to, like what's understood does not need to be explained. And I think that when it, in context of like fashion, I think that in terms of like glam and like hair and makeup and how like those things are also elevated, like the fantasy I think is like partially like I guess a lot of like why I love it so much, but then duality it's like being something and being able to kind of like be malleable and like make it bigger and smaller, but then also still having the knowledge, which I think is something that you wouldn't really have context to outside of being in the circumstance, which is like really, I don't really know what I'm saying, but like,
No, I hear you.
I've been in these conversations like
McQueen needs him, because
Boots.
that was the essence of McQueen, and I feel like he's the only, like you said, living designer who has this essence, where he like, the show breathes what his life experience is in that moment, and that's how McQueen operated.
I mean, funnily enough, you know, after Martin left the brand, it was obviously just the design team working on it, but you know, that design team, I mean, you know, Demna, for example, was leading that for, you know, a few years. And he's someone who I think we can probably agree is a very sort of personality and, you know, driven person and sort of very theatrical in the way that he does things.
He wasn't when he was
But
at
he
Margiela.
wasn't when he was at Margiela. So that's, it's, you know, that's
I
the...
think he still isn't theatrical in that sense. I think Demna would be great to go to Martin Margiela artisanal, because he's also a very selfless designer. He's very selfless in the way he operates, and the team that's around him. It's all very much based on the love of the clothes and the love of the pedestrian as well, and who the audience is, and tapping into what exactly is happening in that audience space.
Yeah, I feel like Vetements was a continuation of Margiela as well. You know, there's a lot of references in Demna's work, but I agree. Yeah, I don't think he's a theatrical person at all.
I think the essence for me with Martin Margiela's work and Demna's work and that influence, which we'll get to, is the reframing of clothing and the reframing of beauty and finding it in different and unexpected ways and reworking it into something that's incredibly familiar but entirely new.
Yeah, because Martin was like the beauty of the clothing and of the community almost, like through silhouette. Whereas Galliano inherently is the beauty of the individual. I think that's what we were touching on. But what I think was interesting about this show, and I only saw a couple clips on my Instagram, is that the format of the way they showed felt very referential to some of Martin's earliest shows. I mean, I didn't actually watch the whole thing. I don't know if we can watch some clips maybe, because I think collection-wise,
It's basically a
about how
direct
it's
reference
shown.
to the Orman 06 Margiela men's
Yeah.
when they did the Pitti. It's basically pulling directly from that. So yeah, it has a lot of like that men's like mid 2000s referencing for sure, which maybe we'll get into, but definitely it feels very men's Margiela.
Yeah,
sure.
boots. And the gloves was just over. No shade.
I wanted to
I'm gonna need me them.
but at the same time, I
have an
feel like it
original
was quite tailored.
Sorry, Amelie?
I feel like it was quite tailored to Pitti Uomo audience, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, it was a little bit homeworking.
So this season, MM6 presented exclusively menswear, which was a first for the brand. It was held at the Florentine Giardino del Orticolatura.
Smashed it.
I'm not Italian, I'm sorry.
Orticolatura.
It's a massive 19th century greenhouse on the outskirts of the city. The show notes describe the collection as an exercise in masculine dressing, the MM6 Maison Margiela way, straightforward, item-driven, and eminently not narrative, using Miles Davis as a filter. What are initial thoughts on the...
It's very masculine, you know? Like, it's almost macho in a way. I'm quite surprised. I expected, well, it's a menswear show, but I did expect it to be a little bit more gender fluid, if that makes sense.
I mean, the
There's a lot of
brand,
like tailoring and
made a big deal about going genderless for a big chunk of...
And then now
the 20.
this?
Yeah.
It's interesting, yeah.
But then if you think about a lot of the real references for Margiela, you know, what he was doing is he was getting men's clothes. You know, it might be a pair of suit trousers, or it could be an army jacket, and then he would narrow the shoulders. He would, and I think a lot of his early aesthetic wasn't feminine, pretty, floral. You know, it wasn't skin-tight dresses. It kind of flew in the face of all of that.
I mean, some of his like some of the blazers, some of the early coats are literally men's jackets tailored down to a women's silhouette.
Absolutely.
And I mean, there's still kind of like an androgyny there. Like there is like a subtle femininity there, like very
subtle.
Which I think is what I actually like the most.
I think it's very feminine as well. I think it's both. I think it definitely holds its own in both worlds. I think if you pulled a lot of the early women's like Margiela looks and put them in front of the entree dye, they would say that's masculine. Whereas, but in that time, it was very forward-thinking, feminine, very sexy to cover the whole body rather than like do what everyone else around them was doing, was like skin. He was.
But then, what do we think the point is for the brand to kind of make a big deal about saying this is their first menswear exclusive show, when I think a lot of women will.
I think because menswear is having a really big moment right now.
And also, I just feel like that is transferable. Like that for me, like the colorways and like the subtle like tailoring. Because there are like that coat. I think the third look was so fab. Or the second look was that third look. Second look, that's over.
Yeah.
That's over.
Yeah.
That is really fab. And a girl could jump into that.
I think that that route has traditionally been quite a straightforward one. You know, I think women have been wearing men's clothes since sort of World War II kind of thing, you know.
And previous guest designers like Galliano have presented men's and women's, and the kind of crossover between the gender spectrum in the past. So I was just confused or questioning why it was such a...
But would it also just be that, you know, they were invited to Pitti Uomo so that, you know, they're going to show men's things? Because, you know, that's the point of, you know, I think in fashion, menswear doesn't have a huge space in comparison to women's wear. So actually, you know, having that dedicated space, I think it is important.
I think in some ways, you know, for some people it may not make sense, but I think for me, the way I'm looking at it, it makes a lot of sense for them to flip it on its head and make it a menswear brand. You know, you've got Sébastien Munier, who was the person who basically helped MM6 become a brand. You know, when he joined in 2000, he basically was told to like work on line 6, which then developed into being MM6, and then he went on to be, you know, the head of Men's Margiela. You know, from like 2005 till Martin left, and I think that's like quite a nice like progression for it to start as a women's wear brand by a designer who then was designing the men's to then do this show and reference the hell out of his work. You know, there's so many references to Sebastian's work at Margiela. So in my mind, it makes a lot of sense.
I think it's interesting as well that, you know, talking about it being a masculine, sort of a very masculine-leaning show, I mean, one of the big references is motorbikes, you know, which is quite like a machismo thing, you know, so they've got the gloves, which are kind of amazing, I think. And it's this blend of, you know, modern motorcycling gloves, but then they have this sort of long part behind, which sort of is a bit more 1930s to 1950s. Lots of leather, almost to sort of, it's almost a bit like fetish wear. It's a little bit Berghain. You know, it's sort of, and also this, the tassels with like the rodeo wear, like Western. I think it does tap into a lot of very sort of hard male tropes, and I think that the skill of the collection is
this vest is a Full Winter 2001 direct reference.
And it's beautiful.
It's nice.
But then also, like, I feel like it's just to like really just to drop the binary, because I feel like that's where the confusion comes. Because I just think to myself, it's like I understand the layers of like, you know, sex, gender, blah, and all of the things, but it's like why can't it just be like a genderless collection that debuts in Men's Fashion Week?
Yeah, why
does that make sense? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like why can it just not be explainable? Like why?
Every headline before the show happened was like.
But do you not think also, like, in terms of like, let's just go back to the numbers in the business, like this is one of the first shows out the gate, and buyers have like however many weeks to place their orders for the stores. Budgets go in here pretty much straight away.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
like you said, like menswear sales are up.
Yeah.
I think also, I mean, from my experience, like a lot of these decisions are based on business strategy versus being a creative point of view. Creative point of view is actually more of a secondary plug-in to what the higher ups say. This is what it is.
Yeah,
This is
I mean,
where we're moving.
they've played into the business side and they've made a digestible collection.
Oh yeah, it's amazing creatively. I think it's great, and I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's leading exactly more into what Martin was doing originally, which I immensely prefer. However, just to point out, I think this was a pretty strategic decision. I don't think they were invited to like open. I think it was like, this is Galliano's left. Let's emphasize MM6, which is great. 'Cause I prefer MM6 low key. Like I think in terms of like its position in the marketplace, love the fantasy of Galliano, but in terms of a brand that, you know, not a lot of brands should exist. Let's be real, there's too many. Like, but MM6 should. Like, it should.
You're right. And I think that that's what's also really interesting about these platforms, because it allows you to kind of gain these like further perspectives like on these things, because like I would consider myself like the type of consumer that kind of like focuses not necessarily on like the history, the heritage, but if it's fab, it's fab. Do you know what I mean? And obviously I think that
I agree with that in some ways.
But
at the same time, I'm like a bit of a purist as well.
I think purist as well, like, is an interesting term. It's like, it's less about to actually start a business now, unless you're plugging into someone's infrastructure already. Like, it takes so long to build out a sustainable supply chain, a really great atelier that can actually scale up something that's really wearable and also making sense in the marketplace, and you're going to have for 100 years. So you guys can keep hold of it and sell it 30 years later. You know what I mean? It's like, to be able to create those kind of pieces takes a lot of work to be able to build that out. I think Renzo's plug-in has been able to scale this company obviously tremendously. However, what I'm saying is not some brands shouldn't exist stylistically, but in terms of like the quality of MM6 and the way it's still referential and making sense within the market space, it should exist. It's a good brand.
Yeah, you're right.
Especially as a diffusion line, it's quite interesting that it's existing, it's selling, and it's really working, because we don't need more brands, but we also really don't need more diffusion brands.
I would argue that this is Margiela's heritage brand. I wouldn't even call it a diffusion. I would call it heritage.
But then that's what I was saying in terms of like context, because I feel like that's the context that you wouldn't really understand outside of circumstance, which is like, you know, as a consumer from like both sides, who kind of like works. I wouldn't say I even work directly in like the fashion realm like that, but like for me, like there is I have friends that have their own brands, and there's like a whole infrastructure of like financial, like, you know, I would say like it's just a money thing. Like it is a massive money thing, because it does take, like, these shows are just cost so much money, and obviously I guess like having to be the person to make the decision on like how you spend that money and like how that translates in terms of the brand itself, like what that's going to do for the brand and everything else that comes under that is very, very interesting.
But then do we just see the show as marketing strategy?
I wouldn't call it marketing strategy. I would say it was stylistically and business-wise just making sense. Like contextually, this makes a lot of sense right now for the business as both brands coexisting and as a brand on its own. I do think they should call it heritage though. That's what I'm going to call them. Because I think MM6, especially from the outside, I think more so than people who are fashion insiders, quote unquote, I think it gives the brand a bad rap. And I really think that this is more aligned with what Martin was doing, and it should be the core. And like you guys were saying, like the artisanal collections have become couture, which is amazing. They can coexist, but diffusion is kind of a bit of a dirty word.
Yeah, it is, especially when it comes to Margiela.
Like I would see like diffusions. I'm seeing candles. You know what I mean? And I love the candles.
Diffuser.
Yeah.
Am I wrong for wanting this to be more conceptual?
I was about to get onto that point.
Because it feels very safe. It feels very safe. It's beautiful, but it could be.
It's very safe, and it's very referential. Like I'm not going to be that guy, but you know, I could pick out like 15 direct references to.
No, be that guy.
Be that guy. I would love to know.
To be that guy.
I mean, the helmet is 2003. The panel bomber on the right is 2007. The codes are 2002. Like,
We're good.
It's nice. And it works really well, but it's in my mind anyway. I've seen it, and I've held these pieces already, and I know how great they are. So it does feel a bit safe to just kind of look back and be like, let's just make that again because it was really good.
But do you think maybe like this could be like also like the market, back to the marketing point, like something that is like has been directly referenced for people that are not purists like yourself, who weren't able to like
exactly
really
why they do it.
That's people who can't get their hands on the archive. Not everyone can get the archive piece, so it's like I think it's really smart.
I agree.
Like the archive market is up. the luxury market is down.
I mean, I can guarantee you, I can sell you that coat for half the price of the retail of that coat is going to be. So it's not about it being accessible. It's about people being lazy and like not trying to actually go and to find that original good thing, and then
But it's convenience, isn't it? You know, if you can go into the store, you can go and you can try it on in 5 different sizes. You'll have it in different fabrics, and it will be new. It won't have any issues. That like there is something to say for it, but it is almost like you're saying it is then going to be the sort of like this heritage brand, and then the point is not really to do anything new, and then we shouldn't therefore be surprised that there's not this great new innovation in this show, because as we were sort of saying, that's more what the main line is for, and if that makes this a diffusion brand, then it's a diffusion brand, but it's not necessarily any bad thing if it fills that gap in the market, and that is business, but it's also, I think it's nice. It's a nice thing to have.
Future thinking. This is especially a question for Harry and Alex. What do we think the longevity of these pieces, this collection, could be?
There isn't any, because I don't think there is. Like that's what I'm saying. It's like in fashion, I think it's amazing when a collection is made and like it holds its ground so much that we look back at it, and I just that you're not going to get that with this, because why would someone go back to the 2025 collection when they can go back to like the early 2000s collection and be like, that was when it was first like interpreted and made into what it was then, That's what I'm talking about. I'm not saying it's a bad thing they're doing this. I think it's amazing that people are able to get hold of these pieces that, otherwise they may not be able to. I just think as an essence and a heritage brand, it just seems a bit lazy that they would go back and just do, that jacket is that's an exact jacket that already exists. It just doesn't make sense.
Is there no difference at all?
No,
Well, I mean, I think
there would be in the quality.
Yeah.
But if we're talking like longevity, this stuff will not hold its time, and then it's just going to be a landfill piece.
I asked because Carrie Taylor is doing a huge Margiela auction.
We are doing a huge Margiela auction in Paris on the 27th. Wow. Please come.
Everyone's going to be in Paris here.
That sounds fab.
Maybe my question for Alex is, when you go through this catalog, what sticks out as something somebody's really gonna want to covet? And
so, I mean, I think in terms of collectibility, as you were saying, having the piece that was seen on the runway from that first show, that feels important in the history of fashion. That you can have things like from the Spring/Summer 1990 show where people see that as a turning point from the 80s into the 90s, from extravagance into sort of this kind of grunge era. So if you can have something really representative of that, then that's fantastic. But, they're extraordinarily rare things. I think one of the interesting things about putting that auction together, I was very fortunate to be able to look through all of the original sketchbooks. And, back to your point about things being copies of things, you'll see the same skirt from Spring/Summer 90. You'll see that in every single collection up until Autumn/Winter 93. And it's not just that they're similar, they are the same. They have the same article code, they are identical, but he'll change the fabrics and they'll be dressed differently. And the theme of the show will be, the concept will be completely different. So you don't see that. But it's still, he did a lot of, from one show to the next, it was almost an ongoing conversation rather than, the shock of the new every single time. I think in terms of collectibility, unfortunately, if you do buy from a diffusion brand, it's not going to retain its value in the same way as something that was that, important key piece. I will say with Margiela though, his clothes, the context of it, the late 80s, the early 90s, this was the time of like flamboyance, of supermodels, of color, of vibrancy, and trends. And he really sort of flew in the face of that. I think he was making clothes for people to wear them, not to wear them once and throw away, but to own them, and they would feel that it reflected their personality. And I think that, in today's world of micro trends and TikTok, that feels incredibly urgent, because Brat Summer lasts a month and then it's on to the next thing. And I think, even when you're looking at that MM6 collection, these are clothes for people to keep and treasure and wear for a long time. They're practical, They have a subdued tone. The fact that they're copying things from 10 years ago and they can still look, contemporary today. Yeah. I think that says a lot about them. So, it's sort of a mixed thing. I mean, if you want to buy something lovely to wear, then that's great. If you want to buy something that's potentially a good investment, then obviously buy it from me. But, or try and have a key piece from a catwalk, basically.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about Martin's kind of legacy. Like you said, people are still producing clothes. They're referencing early collections. People still want to buy into this aesthetic, especially because when Martin started, it was kind of vastly different to a lot of what was happening in fashion with like off the 80s and opulence and extravagance. What do we think the context is with MM6, especially this collection within fashion today? I think it really works because of where consumers are going. Like Betsy said, luxury is down and archive is up, and people aren't out there buying, unless they're oil millionaires, billionaires, etc. Clothes that are for those kind of events, etc. Do we think this is how
I think in
right
today's universe it works really well. I think
it's just current.
As a collection,
what's happening right now.
It's not trendy though, which I like.
Yeah, it's current. It's like people are doing, like everyone, the world is doing this right now. They're literally making things for people right now. And I don't feel like there's, like, I don't know, like sometimes when I have conversations, like we talk about these things of like, in terms of like heritage versus like presence, like it's like what's happening right now, and like there are just a separate amount of people that like current things, and then the other side of those people are historians, like they
but both need to exist for the other to exist as well. And yeah, I think it works. I think it works really well. I think if the clothes are going to be made to like a high standard, and the factories are going to do a really good job, then I think maybe I'll eat my words, and there is like some element of like it being a long-term piece, because there are slight differences to some of the pieces in there. But like I'm saying, there's a reason why a collection like this exists now, because of those collections that existed back then. That's what I'm trying to say is that goodness and that greatness that we're seeing in these, and being like, wow, this works so well now. God, imagine what people were thinking in 2006 when they saw it, and like weren't quite, there's always this famous thing like no one understood Raf Simons when he was making clothes, they only understood it 25 years later. Yeah. That's kind of what we're getting now. Yeah. Is like people were kind of, the stuff was going into sale in the Margiela stores back then, but now this is probably going to fly. And in my mind, that's like the forward thinkingness of the men's team at that time compared to now. So I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying there needs to be maybe a bit more conscious and a bit more intelligent consumerism, to not just like run to the store and buy this because it looks good and it fits good, but to be a bit more conscious with what you're buying in a sense. Because a lot of this is going to be made in China, and it's like.
I was just about to touch on conscious consumerism, because I saw that there's faux fur in this collection, and also leather. And touching on, I feel like what you were putting down, there's also I used to wear faux fur all the time. Like I'm vegan as well, and I switched I get most of my clothes secondhand. I shop a lot at Garrison. I've been upcycling clothes since I was 12 years old. You know what I mean? It's like. And I wear real fur now, secondhand, because the production of faux fur is so detrimental to the environment. And I would be curious about the supply chain management of some of this stuff, and also the kind of materials that they're using, because I feel like Margiela was inherently based in the concept of repurposing. And I feel like, in talking about putting things in a current context, like business-wise it makes sense, stylistic-wise it makes sense, customer-wise it makes sense. I don't know what the back end is of the sustainability side of this part of the business, but like, for example, like using faux mink, like that's not in the realms of repurposing.
Yeah, and they make a point of it in the show notes too.
Like
they emphasize that it's faux fur.
No, of course not.
But to emphasize it, I think it's like they're ticking the boxes, right?
Yeah.
For
what box are you ticking if you're like what box is that?
Well, that it's not.
But even like washing is
you
really
haven't
bad.
killed an animal to do it, I suppose, what they're saying. Leather aside, but
I don't think they would even be allowed to put real fur out there.
But this is the thing that's a bit messed up, and also washing. Like washing.
Depends what fur it is, right? I don't know. I don't know the rules on it.
Isn't there like a place that, I don't know, this is not really like my realm of things, because I am glam. But isn't there like a place where you can just go and buy like secondhand fur?
Yeah, babe, a million places.
So why ain't they buying?
There's like 5 on my street.
Like super cheap.
Because they won't be able to make a 20,000 of them.
You right?
But I guess I think that's why I don't personally find a deep connection to what this collection is, especially with the last MM6 collections, because I thought those were a lot more conceptual and inherent to Martin Margiela's DNA, and this one feels...
It feels a bit safe.
It feels safe, it feels
down,
incredibly
girls.
commercial. I think it's really funny that it was probably the biggest show that MM6 have put on,
Yeah.
and the safest show that MM6 have put on.
But was that because it was literally the first menswear collection since they went genderless, or because of, like, what was...
I think the menswear exclusive thing is a Pitti Uomo thing.
Yeah.
But again, guest designers in the
Like,
past
this is
have-
very
haven't.
Pitti Uomo to me.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, this is very MM6.
Yeah.
Even though, like, look at the color palettes. Like, they're so different.
Yeah.
Do we have a favorite look from this autumn-winter 25 collection? I quite like the leather
I like the
bit.
blue suit.
Yeah, I like
I like the vest.
22 is fab.
The blue suit's
Also, the
good.
ombre set. I'm obsessed with ombre this month. I'm getting everything
The
in
blue
ombre.
suit is a autumn winter 2007 reference. I like it.
What about the Miles Davis inspiration? I'm not super familiar with this. I thought it was
He's like a
really
jazz,
random.
musician, but like, yeah.
They just played the songs out loud, and that was
they
it.
didn't even play the song.
He was all over the
don't really
mood
see it.
boards. He was mentioned in the show notes.
Yeah.
I don't really see the connection.
I don't
if
It's
I'm
just
honest.
like, it's maybe rock.
It's
like a little bit
almost
rock,
like they're just
but-
asking you to sort of think vaguely about jazz whilst you're looking at it to give you a sort of moody vibe. I mean, stylistically, I mean, I can't see that link.
All the women's looks are giving me Christina Nagel, like 101. And I love Christina. I think she's one of the coolest people, like naturally, the way she dresses. But the women in this show really felt like they lent into her, like, aura, essentially.
You know, I liked the, I don't know what the material was, but they printed it all with tiny little stars.
That was apparently
Yeah.
a Miles Davis reference.
Okay, well, there we go.
Really? Okay, then I didn't
Well, that's fab.
Yeah, I think they're great, and you know, I think there is this interesting link as well with Margiela, who sort of quite curiously was interested in sort of lustrous fabrics, which seemed quite at odds with what he did. But he always liked stuff like glitter that was quite quotidian rather than, you know, gold. So I like that.
Are these tiny stars as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fab.
Yeah, they're cool.
It's really nice. It's really nice.
I did Google if there was a link between Martin and Miles Davis, and the only thing I found was a blog post of someone talking about Margiela's jazz club fragrance and comparing it to Miles Davis. So
Okay.
maybe that was the point.
Yeah, I just need those gloves. Can someone get me those gloves? Where do I get those gloves?
What would you keep in the pocket?
I don't know.
2 bags.
2 bags, pocket tissue,
Siggy?
6.
Before we end off, I want to talk about, I guess, the future of MM6, especially now that there's a opening at Maison Margiela for a new creative director, and whether or not that will influence or impact future collections.
I think they're two separate entities at this point. Yeah. I don't think it would have a short answer. No, I don't think it would have.
It depends. It depends who gets that seat. Because I mean, if someone gets that seat that wants to tap into, you know, Martin's original
Yeah,
references,
true.
which is more into this world, then actually the overlaps could become quite
Yeah, fair.
problematic. You know what I mean? Because then you really do have a diffusion. It won't be this heritage brand and this artisanal sort of moment. I mean, so many of the fashion houses' hires for the top seats have been questionable. I feel like if there's another questionable hire, I mean, following in Galliano's footsteps, it's either going to be someone completely opposite, or it's going to be someone that's background is in couture.
I would love to see Glenn Martens at Margiela.
Yeah.
But then there would be an overlap for sure.
Yeah,
It would
that's-
become a diffusion line. MM6 would become diffusion, not heritage.
I don't know, it depends. I think he can... I really like what he's been doing so far, and I can...
And why project's just closed?
Yeah.
Why project just closed?
But then do we...
It would be amazing, but it would be more Martin, which would be nice, but I think it would start to have a little bit of an overlap.
But then if
with
Martin
MM6.
Margiela, let's say he was still designing, then what would MM6 be? It would become a diffusion line. So, you know, it's like, you know, what is most...
if you don't.
Exactly, what's most true to the brand. Because then they also have a wardrobe for men and wardrobe for women. They, you know, for me, that's too many brands. I think it should just be main brand, artisanal, and MM6, and then you have, you know, you have all these extra things which don't get runway shows. I mean, they're great things as well, but you know, at some point you think, oh, how many is too many?
And who would you see at Margiela?
Next question.
Yeah.
Me?
Yeah, you.
Everyone.
I think, well, I was thinking Glenn Martins. I mean, I think possibly Adrian Apulazza. So he's the guy at Moschino who had to come in with like 10 days notice and throw a collection together.
That would be too direct as well. He'd just...
Yeah, but I like, you know, I like that. I mean, for me, I think that he's someone who knows a huge amount about Margiela. You know, he's come into a brand that is very bright and vibrant, and he's made it more demure and, you know, more deconstructed, more elegant, more beautiful, more intelligent.
Those white kind of dresses of his last collection felt very Margiela to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of his Moschino work is quite Margiela.
So then it would be a good, for me, it would be a good fit for that reason.
I mean, I would love to see like a young designer like come in there and just tear it like Maximilian did with Ferragamo. No shade. Like just someone who is like young and fresh and who is hungry for it, like someone new. Like that would be fab. That would be fab. I feel like that would be a great move.
Or it could just go back to being the studio.
Any thoughts on who could do it?
I think I think brands should stop when their designers stop. That's just my
Purist.
You're such a purist.
I don't have an opinion on who goes.
Well, I think that's very valid because I think Martin's influence has really dictated a lot of what's interesting in fashion right now. We think about like LVMH winner Hodakova with her kind of redone leather belts. Demna and Vetements really led the charge with that.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I love
obviously
Hodakova.
outside of the business.
Yeah, I mean, you could say Glenn, but yeah, like his work is heavily like referencing Margiela. I mean, all fashion is now, realistically. Yeah, Raf would, yeah, leave his own brand, go to Margiela.
Probably Prada.
No, I don't have an opinion on who should go next. Sorry.
Martina would be a great choice.
Martin would be fab.
Martina.
Oh, Martina, sorry.
Yeah. From Balenciaga.
I feel like Glenn Martins is like such a favorite of Renzo Rosso. Like he literally has saved his baby, Diesel
Francesco?
baby. Sorry, say again?
After Marni. That'd be nice. He would do something that's more in the vein of what Galliano's done. I think he'd do a really beautiful job.
Do we also think that's
I
why
can see
maybe
that, actually.
this Pitti Uomo collection was maybe a palette cleanser, especially since the last
Like a blank slate kind of thing.
I feel like I
Someone
need a
else comes
palette
in.
cleanser. Kidding.
Any final thoughts on MM6 Autumn Winter 25 menswear?
The color palette, we haven't mentioned the color palette. Like also compared to the show, like to the Pitti Uomo show that Margiela had in 2006, which was all white. And this is like, there's some black, there's some leather, but like, I don't know, this blue look, it's interesting, but probably I wouldn't have expected necessarily something like that.
Are more people wearing black than white?
I'm going to say, like, I mean, I do a lot of consulting, and almost all of my clients the past month are sending me all black line sheets. I'm like, got swatches?
What is going on?
Swatches coming? They're like, no, everything's black. I'm like, oof. It's a market thing. It's a customer thing. It's also like, there's a lot going on in the world, guys. Let's not go there. But like, anyone really feel like busting out like some color right now?
Also, it's an autumn-winter collection, so maybe it does make sense.
Maybe it's just that, honestly.
Yeah.
And I think the blue suit really saved it.
Yeah.
Did it though?
yeah.
Did it sink it or did it save it? That's the question.
I mean, it's there. It's there. Like, and I think also it is like, I think it's like, it's just like, there's always like, I feel like it's nice to just have like just like an abstract piece in the middle of the...
It breaks up.
Yeah.
It's like punctuation in the middle of the
It
show.
reminds us how boring we've all become. Like, there's just this one...
Mind you, most of us are actually wearing black.
Before we end off, what do we want from MM6 moving forward? If anything.
It would be nice to see a collection with no references, and then see what they make.
Interesting.
I disagree. I think more delving into the references and
they'll run
actually
out
bringing them
eventually.
back. But recontextualizing them, I agree. Of course they'll run out, but I think that this idea of heritage is important.
Direct references. Like, there's obviously going to be references with the way the clothes are made and what sort of cut things are, but there are some one-to-one, and I think.
But they could start referencing Galliano era, you know?
Could, yeah.
No,
why
I think
not?
they
could
should
start
use
referencing-
archival, but they should do style outs. And use the same approach that Martin had, you know, it's in terms of getting the archive, and doing style outs. I mean, so much of my practice is based on style outs. It's like, okay, we're gonna get this. We're gonna try it on upside down. Let's put it on. Let's put it on your head. I feel like there's so much of. I mean, that's just how I operate as a stylist. However, I feel like that could be really put into the work process here, and I think it would take some of those iconic pieces and reimagine them, and you'd start to see details that were originally on a top in the 90s on a shoe, and that would be interesting.
That'd be nice.
That would be nice. That's what I would like to see.
Yeah, less direct references then.
Anything else?
I mean, I just want my gloves. That's what I want.
Amelie?
Yeah, I think so far, like I've been loving, to be honest, like also the collaborations that have happened with MM6. It's such a great way to really like bring the brand out there even more, and also like get a younger audience familiarized with the brand. And I would be happy to see a cool collaboration coming up.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us talking about MM6 Autumn/Winter 25. Let us know in the comments what you think about the collection and the show, and what you're looking forward to this fashion month.